Hi, boys and girls. Well, we're going to be looking at some colonial kids. And if you look carefully at this picture, you'll see that there is a boy and a girl walking down a street in a colonial town. Now, looking at these children in these clothes, do you think this is the past or the present? Yep, you're right, the past. These days have already been and gone. We can't change these days, they're in the past. So, we're going to read about some of the clothing that they used to wear way back in the past. We're looking at colonial times. So, what did colonial people look like? When you look in the mirror, you see you. If you lived in colonial days, you would look the same as you do now. But you would wear your hair in a different way, and your clothes would be different too. Even baby clothes were different back then. Clothes in colonial days had different names. If a baby fell, he fell right on his pudding? A pudding was a soft pillow worn around the baby's middle to keep him from getting hurt. When boys and girls were 6 years old, that's the same as some of you guys, they stopped wearing baby clothes. Phew, that's pretty old to stop wearing baby clothes. I don't think you've worn baby clothes for a very long time. From that time on, they dressed just like their mothers and fathers. Where did people buy their clothes? Most people in colonial days did not buy their clothes anyplace. Most people made their own clothes. They planted flax to make linen thread. They raised sheep to get the wool. Everybody in the family helped to make the clothes. Grandmother's job was to card the wool. That means tease it out. The children gathered flowers and berries and roots to make the dyes to color the yarn. People wore bright colored clothes in colonial days: yellow, red, purple, blue. Girls wore bright red cloaks and hoods. Boys wore gray colored stockings and caps. So you've got a lot of different clothing right there. So you've got your baby with its pillow around the middle so that when it falls over, it can bounce right up. That looks like a little girl baby to me, bare feet. Then you've got two little girls walking, and of course their hair is covered because that's what they did all the time. And then you've got your little boy in his cloak and hat and his stockings. So everybody was making their own clothes. Girls and boys went to the woods and brought home armfuls of goldenrod and birch bark to make yellow dye, pokeberries to make red dye, iris to make purple dye, and logwood to make blue. The dye was boiled in the biggest pot in the house. The children stirred the dye with a long stick so it wouldn't get lumpy. Girls and women worked at the spinning wheel. Girls learned to spin when they were just 6 years old, so that means the girls would be learning to spin in kindergarten. Younger sisters helped too. They learned how to knit as soon as they could hold a pair of knitting needles. Girls of 4 could knit stockings and caps. Boys and men did their share of the work. Their job was to weave the cloth on a loom. Then the woman took the cloth and made clothes for the whole family. All the sewing was done by hand. Was there a special time for making clothes? The time for making clothes was all the time. People worked whenever they could. When boys took the sheep to the fields, they took along a small loom. Then they could weave while they watched the sheep. When women went visiting, they brought their spinning wheels along too. They tied the spinning wheel to the back of the horse. Then they could spin while they visited, and no one could say they were wasting time. So then you would definitely hear the saying, make hay while the sun shines. That means keep busy. Don't just sit around doing nothing. You got to be busy all the time so that you take advantage of all the time there is to have things made or put in place ready for the time when they're needed. How did they wear their hair? Girls kept their hair covered all the time, even in the house. They wore hats and hoods or kerchiefs. Boys had long hair. When wigs came into style, most men and some boys in the big towns wore them. They wore wigs made out of real hair, wigs made out of the tails of cows. They wore horsehair wigs and goat hair wigs. They even wore wigs made out of wire. That doesn't sound very comfortable to me. Some men put white powder on their wigs. On a windy day, the powder blew away like snow. Wow, so girls had to have their heads covered all the time? They had to wear either, what did they say? Hoods, hats, or kerchiefs. And boys' hair was long? Interesting. So, I want you to think about what you would look like if you were dressed as a colonial child. There'll be some pictures there to give you a clue, but get your journal and draw yourself what you think you would look like in colonial times, and then a picture of what you look today. Then that way you can see what you would look like in the past and what you look like in the present. And isn't it interesting that they dyed all of their clothing with interesting things from nature so that they could have the colors? Like if I wanted orange, I could use these bright orange flowers to help make the color of my clothing. Scroll on down and see some activities you can do to help get the colors of your clothing.